This is the story of Southwest Airlines Flight 812. On the 1st of April 2011, a Southwest Boeing 737-300 was flying from Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport to Sacramento International Airport. On that flight, they had 117 passengers and 5 crew members on board. This was supposed to be another routine passenger flight. It was about 3:55 p.m. local time. Flight 812 had been assigned flight level 360, and so they were climbing through 34,000 feet to reach their cruising altitude. At 3:58 and 5 seconds, the CVR picked up a noise. The captain made a radio call to ATC, but he was barely audible. ATC was having a hard time figuring out who was transmitting. On board, the captain realized that they were losing cabin pressurization, and so he called for oxygen masks on. ATC asked, "Southwest 812, was that you?" Over the noise of the wind, the captain replied with, "Yes, sir, declaring an emergency descent. Declaring an emergency. We lost the cabin." Something had gone terribly wrong. A plane's cabin is pressurized so that you and I can breathe when the plane is cruising at high altitudes. With the cabin losing its pressurization, everyone on board was at the risk of passing out due to the lack of oxygen. The crew of Southwest Airlines Flight 812 had their work cut out for them. 1. They needed to get this plane down to an altitude where the passengers could breathe without oxygen masks. 2. They needed to find an airport to land this plane. And 3. They needed to hope that whatever was wrong with the plane did not get worse. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the yellow oxygen masks had deployed and there was a 2-foot hole in the ceiling of the aircraft, right beside the baggage bays. They could see the blue Arizonian sky through the hole. A flight attendant was on the PA trying to make an announcement, and he did not have his oxygen mask on, and so he passed out. An off-duty airline staff member tried to help the unconscious flight attendant, and he too lost consciousness. The pilots pitched the plane down to a safer altitude. ATC offered them 24,000 feet, but the crew asked for 10,000 feet. The controller had to check with other controllers to make sure that airspace was clear. The controller radioed other controllers. "Yeah, this is Sector 60, Southwest 812 is in an emergency decompression descent. He'd like 10,000 feet. Can you approve that?" "He's doing it anyway." After that, they were cleared for 10,000 feet. Now they had to look for a place to put the plane down. The closest airport to them was Yuma International Airport. At 4:29 p.m., the plane landed on runway 21 right without further incident. All aboard survived. Once on the ground, the pilots could see exactly what had happened. A 60-inch long section of the airplane skin over the overwing exit had just peeled away. That's what caused the decompression. The 737-300 that they were flying that day had the registration November 632 Sierra Whiskey. The plane was manufactured on the 2nd of May 1996, and it had 48,748 hours and 39,786 cycles on it. A plane's age is measured not by the number of hours flown or in terms of years, but by the number of cycles that it's had. Like I said, when a plane climbs, the cabin is pressurized, and so the fuselage of the plane expands ever so slightly. When it descends, the cabin is depressurized and the fuselage contracts. This constant expansion and contraction can stress the fuselage, and over time, it can lead to problems. On the incident airplane, the skin of the airplane in and around the tear came under intense scrutiny. The skin panels on the Boeing 737-300 should ideally have 2 sets of markings, one stating the manufacture date and one for the built-up panel assembly, which would have the quality assurance mark on it. Interestingly enough, all the panels surrounding the failed skin panel had both the manufacturing seal and the quality assurance seal, but the panel that failed only had the manufacturing seal. The section of skin that had failed was removed and was sent to the NTSB for extended metallurgical analysis. But to understand what they found out, we first have to talk about joints, a lap joint in particular. A lap joint is also called as an overlap joint. As the name suggests, in a lap joint, the 2 pieces of material that are being joined overlap, and then they are joined together, in this case with a row of rivets. Think of 2 papers that have been stapled together. In the case of the Boeing 737, the skin used a lap joint. The skin had a doubler in the middle where the 2 sections of the skin overlapped to provide additional strength. Under the microscope, they scrutinized the outer surface of the inner skin, and they found fatigue cracking. The cracking was so bad that from rivet hole 81 to 89, the cracks ran the entire thickness of the skin. The examination of the skin also brought up something else that's interesting. 10 of the 58 lower row rivets were oversized, while the upper row ones were all standard. In addition to that, a lot of the rivets were underdriven into the skin. The rivets on the lower row had not been made properly. This contributed to the fatigue cracks forming in the lower skin over time. The fatigue cracking affected 58 rivet holes. Since the cracks started out on the top portion of the inner skin, no one was able to see the cracks forming either from the outside of the plane or from the inside. The fatigue cracking was made worse by the relative movement of the lower skin and the doubler. Add to that the oversized rivets, the underdriven rivets, the low quality rivet holes. It was just a matter of time before cracks started in the faulty joint. The NTSB calculated how many cycles it would take for the cracks to get to a point where the skin of the airplane would fail. The number that they got, 38,261 cycles. The plane at the point of failure had 39,786 cycles. To quote the report, examination of the lap joint before it was separated revealed that almost all of the lower row holes in the lower skin were offset from the holes in the upper skin and the attached doubler. The hole quality in the crown and the left side skin panels was not in accordance with Boeing specifications or standard manufacturing practices and showed a lack of attention to detail and extremely poor manufacturing technique." End quote. Remember how I told you that every panel except for the failed panel had a quality assurance seal? Apparently that was due to the fact that the panel had been replaced during the manufacturing process. Since the panel was manufactured so long ago, we don't know how or why the panel was replaced, but we do know how things went so wrong. When the holes were being drilled, the panels were misaligned just a bit. This meant that the rivet holes were misdrilled. This meant that the joint was a lot weaker than expected. This made it more susceptible to the pressurization loads that are put on it in flight, and on that day in 2011, the cracks just became too big and the joint failed. Extremely poor manufacturing technique? I guess that's what it came down to. Manufacturing mistakes made in 1996 lay dormant till 2011, and it almost took a plane down with it. In response to this, Boeing released a service bulletin asking operators to examine the lower skin of the lap joint. The FAA also put out an emergency airworthiness directive asking operators to check the rivet holes in the lower skin. 5 planes did show signs of fatigue, but none of them had the misdrilled holes that the accident airplane had. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. A big thank you to PDX Aviation for letting me use his amazing footage in my videos. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. I'll catch you guys next time. Stay safe.